What is the creme de la creme of German locomotives? According to that steel bridge guy. I think the last time I answered questions like that was with my 1000 subscriber special Q&A. Shout out to all the legends who were already watching my videos back then. For them, a lot of the things I'm going to say will probably not be a big surprise. However, some things have changed around. And when I say locomotives, then what I really mean is locomotives and multiple units. But I just tried to keep the title brief. And I say that because it's important for the first entry, which is something that I'm pretty sure saw nobody coming. On place 5 of my favorite German locomotives and multiple units comes the Cargo Sprinter. In particular the class 691. No, wrong. In particular the class 690, because technically these are two different classes. For those unfamiliar with the Cargo Sprinter, and please excuse my very early work in progress model here with bogies borrowed from an entirely different model, the Cargo Sprinter was, to put it short, a DMU for containers. Basically they were trucks on rails, intended to bring goods traffic also beyond the main line. Basically these were 5-car units, as such fairly lightweight, pretty swift, multiple units of those 5 units. Multiple of them could be coupled together for efficient corridor use on the main line and could then split up to go all their different ways into the more remote areas. It was a pretty awesome concept, however teething troubles as well as the absence of political support for something like that meant that only after a couple of years of testing, the 7 sets that were built, 4 by Windhof, like my model portrays, the class 690, as well as 3 by Talbot, the class 691, were unfortunately discontinued. One day I will do a separate video about that. But I guess it's very easy to see why I love them so much, even though they're an oddball, or maybe because they're an oddball. Something very unique, but in my opinion very, very useful and something that has so much potential, even now about 30 years later. Oh well, let's move on to happier times, to number 4 of the best German locomotives, according to that steel bridge guy. Or actually that's totally wrong because they're just my favorite. Doesn't have anything to do with if they're good or not. And that is the class 24. And yes, it used to be my favorite, now it's on the 4th position. Happens. However, I still love them. And why do I love them? I mean, just look at them. They are in every sense of the word proper, elegant passenger machines. With everything you would expect. A tender, smoke deflectors, 3 large-ish driven axles. It even has a dome. Well, 2 actually. But despite all that, it is still so small. It's half the size of your regular Pacific, but it still is a proper passenger machine, and you cannot prove me wrong. It's just adorable, really. There weren't even 100 of them built in the late 1920s and 1930s, but they still surely left a mark as the smallest standard tender locomotive. And to stay on the topic of branch lines, number 3 of my most favorite German locomotives are the narrow gauge diesel locomotives W51 and W52. I know, these are 2 class names, but if you watched my video about them, you know these are pretty much identical, except for the gauge. As well as some other details, but that's not important right now. What is important about them is, just like the Cargo Sprinter, they show something that could have been and really should have been. They were the latest and in every sense greatest narrow gauge machines of the West German Bundesbahn, and that they are still around today, even though their original use case lasted only for a very short time, I think shows how useful these unlikely heroes are. And by the way, me and the W52 go back a long way. Not only have I always wanted the LGB model, which to this day I don't have, it was also the very first locomotive I ever attempted to create in Blender. I stress attempted, because my first attempt was a straight up fail. I attempted it twice, and both absolutely failed. After eventually having learned many things, I came back to it and made it a reality. Even though the first iteration still didn't look very good, but at least it was a complete model. And after several reworks, we are finally somewhere where this model is presentable. Honestly, I love it. I struggle a lot with the proportions because, ironically enough, it's always those boxy shaped locomotives who are absolutely infuriating to recreate. Because the smallest mistakes you do throw all of the proportions off. But apart from their backstory, I think they're also just very, very elegant machines. They have a certain sense of elegance to them, despite being very compact. I think they're elegant and cute at the same time. A little bit like the Class 24. You might start to recognize a pattern here. Oh well, let's move on to number 2. And number 2 is a favorite of many. It is a Bavarian S36. In particular the K series, which in fact wasn't built for the Bavarian State Railway, as at that point it no longer existed, but for the Deutsche Reichsbahn instead. As a proven design and as there was always a chronic lack of high-end passenger machines, construction of them continued after 1920, however at that point already with some very noticeable modifications. In particular the cab, which looks already kinda like the standard cabs, which give the K series a very, you could say blocky, but you could also say a very powerful and strong appearance, while still maintaining the elegance of these very beautiful machines. And the embarrassing thing is, like you probably have already noticed, that despite ranking on place number 2, I still don't have a model of it. Yeah, that is kinda pathetic, I know. I'm the first to admit this is not a good thing and we'll see what we can do about that. Alright. But of my favorite locomotive, I do have a model. And that can only be the Prussian T18. It has a very unique appearance. And I'm pretty sure weren't that class so numerous and successful, they were built in the 1910s and 20s and still around in the 1970s in both parts of Germany. I think there would be a pretty obscure and forgotten class nowadays. You know, look at the smoke box, which is really hiding behind a lot of stuff that is in front of it. It really looks a bit like a face buried in an oversized scarf. But for me that makes a lot of the visual interest, despite of course the bulky elegance of a fast-running passenger tender machine. It has the long elegant boiler, but is then squared up by the side tanks as well as the rectangular running board. I mean, it's just a slab, which is unusual for a locomotive that size. But it works. I think it's just really, really beautiful, and in terms of model railways, very versatile. Even though from how it's built, it was meant for a very specific purpose, you can put it in front of almost everything. Main lines, branch lines, goods trains, passenger trains, to some extent even express trains. You know, the lower end of express trains. Alright, there you have it, my 5 favorites. However, there are still a couple of things I want to add, some honorable mentions, so to speak. First of all, you might notice we have 3 steam locomotives and 2 diesel locomotives. What about electrics? Do I not like them? Do I despise them? Oh, that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I love electric locomotives, especially early pre-war designs. They are just something else. Very blocky, very geometric, and all of them also very unique. However, there isn't really a particular one that stands out to me. I love them all, but they're all, I don't know, I don't want to say similar because obviously that is not true and that is what makes early electric so fascinating. But it's very difficult to pick a favorite, and that's also why I haven't included one on this list. You know, there can only ever be 5 in your top 5. You also notice the absence of locomotives like the Class 50 or the Prussian P8, both of which, surely objectively speaking, belong to the best and most successful German locomotive designs. But maybe that's also a bit of the issue I have with them. While I love both of them, especially their more odd variants like the 50s with cabin tenders or the P8s with tub tenders and push-pull equipment. Once again, you might notice a pattern here. But general, these are lovely locomotives, but they are simply not unique enough that they speak to me on a personal level like the T18 does or the V52. And now to the burning question some of my longtime viewers now might have. Why does my top 5 list not include these absolute cinnamon rolls? They are literally in the channel logo. What are your favorite locomotives? Let me know in the comments below. And a big thank you goes to my channel members, including Contrian, Den, Dave Heise, Flipschwip, K. Frankly, Lucas Ilskens, Martin Wigican, SGT Scuba, Søren Dominic Cook, Steamy Player and Void Elder for helping me to create more videos. Honestly, it's similar to the early electrics. There are just so many different classes of small field railway steam locomotives that it's impossible to pick just one of them. Oh well, what are your favorite locomotives, German or otherwise? Let me know in the comments below.